it makes me think, how many people die with the wrong beneficiary on a life insurance policy, and it happens all the time.
Yes, it happens. That wouldn't cross into the part of your estate and part of the will, but yeah, I mean, we definitely hear those, sort of where it just goes to the one child, and the idea was that it was supposed to get distributed, amongst them, just name the oldest, for example, something like that, and it doesn't exactly play out that way, and so it's,
Welcome to Above the Legal Limit. I'm your host, Justin Chopin, business owner, lawyer, dad, world's best husband, traveler, and adventure seeker. On this podcast, we mix business with pleasure. We'll dive into growth strategies, entrepreneurial adventures, the business of law, and prove that business isn't boring. So let's get ready, because we are going above the legal limit. Welcome to Above the Legal Limit. I have a special guest today, Patrick Coudrain. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Patrick, you come to us from Hammond, our one of our sister cities, just slightly west of where we are, on the other side of the lake. And you are with the firm Cash, Coudrain and Bass.
Yes.
All right. Tell me about that. So you were telling me before you are a second generation.
Yes.
I am as well.
Yeah.
So so tell me about your practice.
Yeah, so Cash, Coudrain and Bass, we've been around, just celebrated 50 years in practice back whenever my dad, Andre Coudrain, and the late Rodney Cash got together mid-'80s and started their practice. And then over the years, it's grown into what it is now. We got 6 attorneys in our office. We're a general civil practice. We do a lot of different things. You never quite know what you might get in Hammond, Tangipahoa Parish on the North Shore. But
fair enough.
But yeah, so we represent anything from large government bodies to larger businesses, and relatively speaking, in the Hammond area, to just individuals needing something as simple as a power of attorney, and really just trying to help people out. We like the idea of knowing who your client is and having that face to face. I know you're in that similar idea of you know who your client is, that sort of thing. So we really latch onto that, try to build relationships and trust. Have long-term repeat customers. Not always in the bad sense. Just because you have repeat customers doesn't mean it's always there seeing you for bad things. So so we're sort of you get in the door, whether it's for doing mom or dad succession, and then you get to know the family, and then starts having those conversations, those important conversations about hey, what about your planning? You've got kids.
Right.
And what do you want to do? And just kind of build on that.
Beyond
those relationships.
The plan is don't die, right? Like that's the plan. My wife and I, that's our plan. Our plan is like, we're just going to have to live long enough so there won't be anything left to give them.
That's right.
Well, I always think Louisiana has, in my opinion, favorable intestate laws. I think I think the civil code understands generally how most people may want their possessions to devolve, right? I mean, now there are nuances, and not always, and not every family's the same, and some are more complex. And what do you do if your kids are really young, right? But
yeah, I think Louisiana tries to split the baby, so to speak. Tries to balance the rights of the surviving spouse as well as the kids, and I think it's just making sure people understand what that looks like and what the alternative ultimately would be. And oftentimes, in almost every case, when you really start talking to somebody, you realize the default Louisiana provisions are probably not in there. It's maybe not exactly what they want to see happen, whether it's even something as simple as who's the administrator, do you put it under independent administration, just something as simple as that, if otherwise you're just giving everything to your kids. It's, maybe just having that one extra step of, just putting the right person in charge just to make sure to limit any disputes. I mean, that's ultimately my goal is whenever I'm meeting with somebody is, I'm meeting with the mom or the dad, and looking them in the eye, understanding what they're wanting to have accomplished. And
truthfully, what you don't want a dispute over your estate.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
that's awful. Like
so
that's the last thing as a deceased person. If you're like looking down, right, you're like looking at your funeral and you're like, I can't believe you guys put me in that freaking suit. It's my least favorite suit, and you're like, maybe you're noticing like, oh yeah, she's there. Okay. And then, and then maybe you're witnessing your family in a dispute over your estate. I think that would have to be heartbreaking to see that.
Yeah, I don't handle divorce and custody, but I do successions, and sometimes that can feel very similar.
I would imagine it's so we don't do successions, and in a past life I did domestic work. When I started the firm, I was a commercial litigator for a long time. I've represented small business and big business and lenders, and I've done, maritime admiralty work. I've done insurance defense work. So I've kind of done it all. But people you'll see these guys were like, I'm going to start my insurance defense law firm today. And that usually lasts about, 6 to 8 months. And then they're like, I'm doing PI work, right? Because it's just, you can't, or I'm doing domestic. It just doesn't work that way. So I knew when I started the firm, I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to hang out a shingle and say I do, insurance defense work. Like, that's silly. And I don't, but I did some commercial work for a while. And I had some clients that I was able to kind of, bring with me to get started. And I did domestic work because I was at that age where you could always find somebody who needs a domestic lawyer, and you just ask around, and they're like, oh, well, those guys over there, they're not doing so great. So, one of the two of them probably needs to hire you. And so, so that's how I got started. And I did that for about a year. And then maybe 6 months after that, I was like, no, I cannot get rid of these cases fast enough. But when we get to trust in estates or successions, I mean, I don't know it. We don't, and clients often ask us, and it's that time where I have to get that lawyerly like, well, shit, I really don't know. You really need to, I'm not able to give you tax advice. Well, I like to be really frank with clients. I'm like, I'm not able to give you this advice. And the reason is I really don't know. And anything I tell you, I probably got off of TV just like you. So, I could talk to you all day about successions. In theory, did well in law school in successions. Sure. I got like a B+ in tax, but I don't even know how I got that, because I think there could have been like a grading curve situation. It's probably more like a C+. Those are just not my strong suits. So if you really want the advice, that's fine. Maybe sign like a waiver or something, because I know you're getting really bad advice. So it's always good to connect with people who know that area of the law, because it's just truly not what we do. But I see a huge need for it. A huge need. Constant, we do a lot of marketing, so we just get inundated with people with questions about trust in estates. It's like, and
then, maybe what to do after they get their large payout from you guys.
We do,
how to plan accordingly, thereafter. Yeah.
We do have that, I try not to. I try not to, because I don't want to be condescending.
Sure.
I really don't, but I have had to counsel a few clients. Like, I'm begging you, please open a bank account. Right. I was like, because some people don't. Some people, like, they'll just go cash the check. And, I've seen clients with 6-figure settlements go cash checks. And it's really not what we want. But by and large, when I say that to a client, they go, oh, no, I'm not. I'm going right here across the street to the bank. And that's all I even tell them. Like, you don't have to go to Whitney, but that's where I bank at Whitney. Just go to Whitney. They're great. They'll take care of you. Something. I don't know. But not all clients want to take that advice.
Yeah. And then it's just, not a lot of people want to also contemplate their own mortality. It's not a glamorous conversation to have, but so we just try to be pretty frank about it. And I've seen enough examples of where people don't have that right planning, and then you're sort of in these situations, or people pull stuff off of Google. That's the thing that makes me cringe is, so and so printed something off Google.
Sign here.
That's
not valid.
They wrote it on a piece of paper, and it's like, okay, well, that very well could be valid, but did they really know what they were writing out, understand the terminology that was used, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Are you seeing, because that was a big ding for a while, right? So people would come, and they'd go onto the internet, and they'd print out a will, and they'd fill in the blanks, right? And then, so it didn't take long for Louisiana to invalidate that. So if you're listening and you're like, I don't get it, well, that's what we're talking about, right? If you cannot print a will off the internet, fill in the blanks, and expect that to be valid, even if it is, I think, signed. And can you do that?
Be notarized and 2 witnesses. The notary's going to probably have some disclaimer on there.
Right. If you're doing that,
and all that,
right. If you're printing it off of Google, chances are I'm going to take a while. I'm going to take a stab, as you probably aren't signing it in front of a notary. Right. So, but I have wondered lately, with sort of the advent of AI, are we going to start seeing another iteration of that, just like a more advanced invalid will?
Yeah, I haven't personally seen that. I think that's probably coming. At least I haven't seen it yet.
Ask
in
like
my practice.
Siri, like, hey Siri, write me a will.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
She's probably gonna respond to me.
That's right. Yeah.
My kids are always doing that. My kids are like screaming at my phone, and they don't understand that it's not going to respond. It's only going to respond to my voice, which, by the way, thank God, because if it did, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would imagine, with these large language models, you could, in theory, I guess, go in and say, draft me.
And I'm sure it would get you, some of the way. Probably, if all you're really asking is give everything to my kids or everything to my spouse, you got to contemplate forced heirship. Everything's kind of subjective to the individual, but yeah, I'm sure there'd be something along the lines. But you still got to follow
half
all the
way.
requirements.
Problem, that other half might be a real disaster.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, halfway doesn't
halfway
get you anywhere.
Probably not the best.
Correct.
Probably shouldn't do that.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, definitely just go and have that conversation. People might be surprised as it's maybe not as expensive as you might think it is, and we get a lot of requests, people coming in about wanting to do trusts and the idea of irrevocable versus revocable trust, and some people come in just kind of with a half-baked idea of what that really means, or they think that if you choose one, you're getting all the benefits of all of them and not contemplating the downfalls of them or all the logistics that goes into for the rest of your life. You got to title everything in a certain way. Just because you create a trust, that's just a bucket. You still got to fill the bucket with your stuff, and then
I've definitely had that conversation with clients, and I don't have to be an expert in trust to know that, I'll listen to them and they'll say, well, I want to put it all in a trust, and I'm like, well, what do you have? And they'll start listing, and I was like, oh, for God's sakes, don't do that. Listen, I don't know the first thing about this, but don't do that. That sounds like a nightmare.
Right.
Or what we'll see a lot is, people who want to put assets in a trust that they don't own, right? So that's pretty common, right?
Well,
so
I just had conversations where you're looking at a will, and they have in the will talking about assets that they've given away 20 years previous.
Or a house.
Yeah, right. Well, that's,
right, and it's like not really their house to put into a trust.
Correct.
Correct. Right? So if you have a $500,000 house and you have a $400,000 mortgage, putting that into a trust isn't going to do what you think it's going to do. That's not going to be that helpful. But a lot of people don't know that, and we're all, especially in this day and age, right? We're like inundated with partial information about complex topics.
Yes.
All of us, you and me too, right? Like, so.
And then how does that apply to me in my scenario? Especially we see a lot more blended families, now, so navigating, that relationship and those dynamics as well. That's just another thing that, we try to encourage anybody. And certainly in that situation, you got young kids, the idea is, I'm going to give, eventually everything go to my kids. Well, if something happens, your kids are young adults. $300 was a lot of money to me at 18 years old, much less thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Or maybe one kid is capable and the other kid's not, right? So,
right. One's got judgments against them, and then that gets the bankruptcy or those judgments get implicated into trying to sell the property with the other kids. So it's, it's really just really ultimately getting to know the individual and just kind of, and get to know their family and understand what their goals are, what pitfalls may be there that they're not thinking about. So it's just asking the right questions and keeping that dialogue, and then asking them to follow up. Hey, look, any major life change moving forward, circle back. Here's some examples of things that, at least every few years, just pull it out, look at it.
Right.
Just even if it's just to make sure everything's. If you got trust provisions, I tell people if you have trouble sleeping at night, you can read through that
read through that trick,
or the power
fall
of
asleep in no
that sort
time.
of thing. That's right. Yeah.
Well, that's like what we see a lot. So I'll say this: my wife and I. It wasn't a joke. We don't have a will, but she's a lawyer and I'm a lawyer, so I feel like we know exactly the mess we're making. We understand exactly. We're just choosing to just ignore it. But she's young, so she'll be, what was I saying? We always see this with people who get divorced, and they forget to take their ex-spouse off the life insurance policy.
Yes.
I had to recently renew, my life insurance policy, and there was like a big pop-up. They were like, "Are you sure you still want her to be the beneficiary, right?" And I'm like, "No, we're good. She's good. We can one more year. So ask me again next year."
That's right.
But I always, it makes me think, how many people die with the wrong beneficiary on a life insurance policy, and it happens all the time.
Yes, it happens. That wouldn't cross into the estate part of your estate and part of the will, but yeah, I mean, we definitely hear those, sort of where just goes to the one child, and the idea was that it was supposed to get distributed, amongst
Right.
just name the oldest, for example, something like that, and it doesn't exactly play out that way, and so it's,
Can you put the trust as the beneficiary of the life insurance policy?
Yes. Yeah,
So you could do that.
Yeah. So that's something that we oftentimes will at least bring up and see if that.
That's what I always
kinda
figure.
fits. Yeah, especially if you're dealing with young kids. Anytime we're
Like
dealing
my kids
with.
are young.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean, that's how I've got it set up with our families.
I don't know. Like give my kid $1 million life insurance policy, and like God knows what.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people if you're talking to having that life insurance, policy question, going out and getting a life policy because you want to protect your kids, protect your family. If something happens to you, if you don't kind of follow up on the other end of it, of contemplating, okay, if I pass and they're young or young adult or a minor, they can cash that out at 18 years old, and you're not around, and if anything, you could be creating more harm than you are doing good, given
Right.
young adults, they don't have good support around them to do the right things with it. So it's just
Or it gets squandered from
right.
whoever,
exactly They
whoever's
get taken
raising the
advantage
children.
of. Right, it gets used and abused certain ways, or they go out and they buy a Corvette instead of a just
Right.
a
Instead of a
decent
Honda.
vehicle. Right, exactly. So it's just those sorts of things, and just putting the right people in charge of who effectively will be their parent, whether it's in that true guardianship role, but also who's going to handle paying for the things that they need to. So just a matter of covering all those bases and thinking about that. One of the things that comes up too is not a lot of people think about is in the context of like a power of attorney as well. The power of attorney really ropes into a will as well, because we've had to do too many interdictions of people where things get frozen up because mom or
Right.
dad didn't do their planning. But even in a scenario of if you got young children or young adults that are going off to college and they get in a car accident, they're in the hospital, the parents won't be able to just freely communicate with the medical provider up there unless the child's already filled out certain paperwork about release. But if they're going to the emergency room in college, they unless they're a frequent flyer at the emergency room, probably hadn't filled out any paperwork. So parents have to, seen it drive 4 or 5 hours. You don't know what you're going to find on the other side.
Interesting. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, so because once they're turned 18 years old, they're an adult, and you don't have any decision making, any authority. You got to be there in person. They'll talk to you once you get there, but until then, we've had that happen twice just in the last few years. Where fortunately, it wasn't terrible, but
Right.
you're thinking
But it
the
could
worst.
be.
You're thinking the worst. Certainly,
Sure,
and
we
certainly
plan
could
for the
help
worst, right?
For something very
It
simple
could be.
as just getting a power.
I always
of
wonder,
attorney
like,
when they go off to school.
I think it depends. I guess where are you? A lot of doctors I can see being like, well, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to follow this hard line position. But you don't know. Like you don't know. They may not be. They may not be at Oxnard down the street. They may be God knows where.
Sure.
In some other town. And they don't know you from Adam.
That's right.
But you're right. You bring up a good point. A lot of people think that this is, you have to be like rich to have like a trust, right? Or to have these things, or it's very expensive to hire lawyers to do these things.
At least I can say in Tangible Parish, it doesn't have to be too expensive.
Right. It doesn't have to be like that.
Right.
But you're right. If you have a life insurance policy, what are you going to do with that? It's a good point. It can't just sit there in an account. Right.
Right. Yeah, you want to put it to work, and that's the idea too. Is you put stuff in a trust for your kids. If you play out that tragic situation of, if you got kids that get a trust funded because their parents died young. It doesn't just sit there and rot in a savings account.
Right.
You can
just erode over
so
time.
you put it in a trust. You give the trustee a lot of tools to be able to invest that and work with professionals to grow that.
So who do you recommend people use as their trustee?
So typically, if we're talking about younger kids, you're usually thinking about who's the legal guardian. That's typically the first thought is, okay, something happens to me, who would be my guardian to care for, actually raise the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, that's who ends up being the trustee, because it can get a little bit of friction created if you got the one that's raising the child, bearing all the expenses, housing them, and then you got somebody else that's controlling the checkbook of
Right.
paying for, whether it's tuition, healthcare, first vehicle, those sorts of things. So oftentimes it's the guardian as well, oftentimes falls in that same sort of category. So, usually we're talking wills, we're saying, okay, well, who's the the person, the adult in your life that you trust, whether it's a brother, sister, and even for my young parents, oftentimes it can be even their parents, maybe the idea of my parent who's 60-something years old, the idea of them maybe serving as a trustee for 20 plus years, that doesn't sound great, but at least you have somebody for those initial.
May give you.
You
can have. Can you have? So can you have a backup trustee? Right. That's how you do it.
Yeah, that's what we absolutely recommend is naming somebody. 'Cause ultimately, then it becomes kind of a free for all. Who gets to court first, and who can, and that just creates more expense and issue. But yeah, we like to. Sort of, look, you try to look as best you can into the crystal ball of, who do we think will be around and looking out for the best interests of the child. And, and oftentimes when we're setting up those trusts for kids, we're talking about maybe somebody's 5-year-old. It's like, okay, well, when do you want this trust to end? Some people think, maybe 21 years old, 25 years old. I'm thinking, well, look, I like to think I was somewhat responsible, went to law school, but at the same time, you'd have given me a significant amount of money at that age.
How far out can I go?
Yes,
right?
Exactly. So that's what we do is we try to, encourage people to look further, 30 plus, 35,
40, right.
But we give the trustee, oftentimes we give the trustee authority to, hey, we can make larger distributions in the interim. Again, it doesn't get locked up. It's, well, look, I'm going to pay for things.
I want to go to med
college,
school. Okay,
go to med
fine.
school, need a down payment on my first house,
fine.
That sort of thing. So you're still putting it to good work. It's not, again, not getting locked up forever, but, generally you try to protract that out. And then if the child's demonstrated enough maturity and they got a good head on their shoulders and maybe there's not enough money to justify keeping it for another 5 years, and oftentimes we build into it that the trustee can say, you know what, take it and go ahead and go on your way. But yeah, and then just balancing all that too, just, and the further out you go on ages, look, so many people are getting married and divorced, and, so as long as it's in that trust, it kind of helps shield it, some from those young relationships that, maybe don't pan out
right.
the way you hope. So there's a lot of benefits to just having those conversations, because I think oftentimes when you start having those conversations, it reaches common sense sort of solutions, or you present problems. Ran into this issue, and then people tend to really gravitate and understand. Okay, no, this makes sense. We need to probably do this, and it's not always a one size fits all, but you can kind of generally segment the sort of demographic of age and
how messed up is your family, right? So it's be for real. Yeah. So how many divorces?
Yes.
How many spendthrifts do you have, and do you have any addicts? So we'll start there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I feel like that's why I'm not that kind of lawyer, because that's where I'd come in and be like, all right. Let's just, how messed up is your family? Like, it's not messed up, but this is a terrible law firm.
Yeah. I've had a trust where we had it to where it ended when the beneficiary reached 65 years old.
Oof. You know what? But that's so what? You funding their retirement?
Basically,
that'd be nice to know that you don't have to save for retirement.
There you go. Right.
I'm sure all the Instagram people are like, no, live your life now.
Right. That's right.
Don't retire. But that's the big thing, right? That's right now in America is live your life now. Mm-hmm. And give yourself a round of applause.
Give yourself flowers, right?
Yeah, right. It'd be nice to be able to I'm just not going to worry about retirement. Mm-hmm. That's a nice gift. I read somewhere, some social media post, probably bullshit, but you put it was like $100 a month for 18 years into I don't know if you put it into an S&P 500 or you put it in some interest-bearing account, and then if you stop investing by the time your kid's in college or out of college, they would have enough to fund their retirement. I don't really see how that's possible, but I know Warren Buffett says, right, it was the law of compounding interest.
That's right.
Is it's mind-boggling, and people can't even wrap their heads around the compounding interest.
Right. Yeah, I got people that I send our clients to have more discussions about those things.
You're right, but was that $1,200 a year for 10 years? I don't see how that does that, but they say it does. Right. So I often think hey, maybe that'd be a nice thing for your kids. I wouldn't even tell them about it.
Yeah, and there's different, depending on your situation, there's tax benefits to doing some of those things. Louisiana, there's no inheritance tax, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. A lot of people come in thinking, oh, well, how much inheritance tax are my kids going to have to pay for? Kids inherit a house thinking they're going to have a big tax bill. Fortunately, there's none in Louisiana. The federal what is it, 12, 13 million a person, something right now. So
it's a lot higher than people, right? I mean, people are always get really concerned about that.
And then Louisiana community property state, really you're doubling that if you're talking to both, both spouses. So so really taxes are really less of an issue. If anything, capital gains tax and getting the stepped up basis in in the succession. If mom and dad bought a house 50 years ago for $20,000, and now it's worth $300. One day that goes to the kids in the succession. They get to claim that stepped up tax basis where they sell it. There's no capital gains tax, or same thing with a commercial building, something like that. So so there's some benefits to some people come in and they say, oh, like I want to donate everything to my kids now so we avoid probate. Well, you donate it to your kids. It sounds great, but now their tax basis is zero to where they go to sell it. They're looking at a real big capital gains tax bill at that point. So so oftentimes it's just again educating them on what may seem like the easiest, simplest solution. Well, what are the ramifications of that? What does that really mean? So,
is that how that works? So if you donate it, so
it's like you paid nothing for it. Yeah,
got it. That makes sense. Okay.
As opposed to succession, you get we try to get a good valuation of what the property is.
Right. Like I inherited some PepsiCo stock. I mean, I still have it. It's not like it was nice, but it doesn't do anything for me necessarily. But my CPA at one point was like, well, what's your basis in the stock? And I'm like, I don't have a freaking clue. And honestly, we're reaching the point where it's impossible for me to find out. I was like, I had basically had to be like, I think it would have been. I'm researching. Like I remember, like she died when I was, like in the 8th grade. So I'm just gonna give it a year, and then go on you can see, but like what was a price per share in like 1990 or something like that. Right. And I was like, this is as close as I can get you. I don't know. It was a million years ago. Right. Nobody knows where anything is. Right. Half of it's certificated. No one even knows what their certificates are. Right. It's just like, it's here. Here, you want it, take it. Right. But I mean, finding your basis, 30 years, 35 years later, when you're pre-digital age, is not as simple as it sounds. Right. Now it'd be easy. Everything's digital.
Well, even it kind of brings up something that comes up oftentimes too is when I'm talking to people about their estate planning, it's having some list of kind of what you have, so your kids know what you've got.
Nobody knows. Yeah, if I die tomorrow, my wife is in a pickle. She doesn't know where anything is. She doesn't even know how to get into the safe. Right. So we have I'll keep family documents. No clue how to get in there. Right. No one knows the power would be shut off. The water would get shut off eventually. I don't,
right. Yeah. So just having those things just to at least know, because not that I'm that old of a lawyer, but when I first started, I was told to tell people, just look out in the mailbox, wait for bank statements to come through.
No, man, we're paperless.
Now everything's paperless.
All those emails.
Now it's having the email passwords and that sort of thing.
Because I don't know where half that stuff is, especially in that old stuff, right? If the logins are a million years old off of that that old, that first email address everybody got. Yeah, that was like before your
embarrassing for
right, you not like your Justin Chopin, whatever. It's more like like Bootylicious 27, right? Or Cupcakes 56. I don't know. You had to have a number. Right. All the other cupcakes were already taken. Right. So you have some embarrassing email address. My
mom still got her old Rolodex, and her password has been changed so many times that she's got all these sticky notes on top of the old ones, and
I still do that. Like, be for real. Like, I'm not that advanced. I need to download some software for it, but we'll have some stuff where it makes you change it every 6 months, and there's just I can't wrap my head around that. Right. If anything, I think it's making my account less secure because it's forcing me to write it down. Right. And then it's like, okay, well, reset the password, and I'll go to reset it, and they're like, no, that's already the password. I was like, I don't think so. It's like, all right, we'll try this one. Nope, you've already used that one. I'm like, all right, how about this one? No.
Yes. Well, what helps with the iPhone now, they've got the passwords, I guess, app.
Yeah.
And you can do the Face ID, and that'll show you any of your old passwords. That's very helpful.
That helps me out 30% of the time. I don't know why. I don't have a deep enough understanding of why something is saved and something is not. Like Google will save some things for me. Apple's like, don't trust Google. We'll save it for you. Like, okay, you could save it for me. So then now you're on your computer, which is a PC, and then but it's on your phone, not on your computer. So I was like, if you guys could work this out amongst yourselves. I don't need to be in your Apple Google spat. Right. Okay, I got my own problems.
Right.
Okay, right. I got my own clients. I got my own family problems. I don't need to be in your Google Apple spat. Y'all come together. You get one password software we can all use, and come across the aisle.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, look, we've had it to where, I mean, Dad passed away young, and the daughters came to us, and well, we knew we're in Hammond. I knew he banked in New Orleans. Like, well, that really, it doesn't really narrow it down a whole lot. So we're sending
it's
out
not Wells Fargo. Check.
Yeah.
We got to knock one off the list.
So we're just sending out mass letters to everybody. Just say, hey, do you happen to have something? And you just
that works sometimes. Yeah. I've collected money like that before on judgments, right? Where we don't know where they bank, so I'll just send it to Chase, Capital One, Whitney, and something will come back, Regions, and usually, but you never know if it's like some homestead, on some small street in Metairie, they might get you there on that one.
Right,
so
right.
That's hard to do.
Yeah,
well, all right.
Yeah,
Well, hey, I'm getting the this. I mean, I went on too long. So, Patrick, tell everybody where they can find you.
So, Cash Coudrain and Bass. We're in historic downtown Hammond, 106 South Magnolia Street. We're catty corner from the PJ's, the old PJ's Coffee House. One of the original franchise locations there. But yeah, we got a great long-standing office over there. Great people. Happy to help you out however we can.
Awesome.
At least point you in the right direction.
Right. If you're out there, that's where you go. That's the place to be.
Appreciate it.
So thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Me.
It's great meeting you. Thank you for joining me today on Above the Legal Limit. If you enjoyed the show and you want to hear more about business and law, hit that subscribe button. If you didn't like the show, keep it to yourself. Remember, there's no limit to what we can achieve. We will see you next week. Until then, even though we're above the legal limit, let's drive safely. Cheers, everyone.